The man living inside the walls. Everyone has heard strange noises in their house at night. A small creak in the floor. Pipes shifting behind the walls. The quiet movement of a house settling after a long day. Most people hear those sounds and fall back asleep. Because the human brain prefers simple explanations. Rats, old pipes, the wind. But sometimes the explanation is something far worse. This story begins with a man named Daniel. Daniel had just bought a small house outside the city. It was quiet, older neighborhood, large trees, the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. The house itself had been built sometime in the 1950s. Thick walls, old wood floors, and a narrow attic running above the entire house. Daniel loved it immediately. It felt peaceful, safe. The first week passed without anything unusual happening. Then one night Daniel woke up around 2 in the morning. At first he didn't know why. Then he heard something, a small sound coming from the wall beside his bed. A scratching noise. Daniel sat up in bed and listened. The sound stopped. He waited. Nothing happened. Daniel laughed quietly to himself. Old houses get mice sometimes. He went back to sleep. The next night the sound returned, only this time it was louder. Scratch, scratch. Slow movement inside the wall. Daniel knocked on the drywall with his hand. The noise stopped instantly. Silence. Complete silence. That was the moment Daniel should have been worried, because animals usually run when they hear noise. Whatever was inside the wall had stopped moving completely, like it was listening. Daniel tried to ignore it, but the sounds kept happening. Every night, always around 2 in the morning, sometimes scratching, sometimes something dragging slowly across wood, sometimes something that sounded disturbingly like footsteps. After 4 nights of this, Daniel decided to investigate. He bought a small inspection camera from a hardware store, the kind plumbers use to look inside pipes. That night he drilled a small hole in the drywall near the floor. Then he pushed the camera inside. At first he saw nothing, just darkness between the wooden beams, dust, old insulation. Then the camera moved further into the wall, and Daniel saw something that made his stomach tighten. Footprints. Small dusty footprints on the wooden support beam. Human footprints. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief. There was no way someone could fit inside that space. The wall was barely wide enough, but the footprints were there, clear, fresh. Someone had been standing inside his wall. Daniel pulled the camera out slowly. Then he did something that would later haunt him. He whispered quietly toward the wall, "Hello?" For several seconds nothing happened. Then Daniel heard something. Breathing, slow breathing, right inside the wall. Not an animal, a person, someone was inside his house, inside the walls. Daniel jumped backward and stared at the drywall, his heart pounding in his chest. The breathing stopped. Complete silence again. The next morning, Daniel called a contractor to inspect the house. They checked the attic, the basement, the crawl space. Everything looked normal. No tunnels, no hidden rooms, nothing. The contractor laughed when Daniel told him about the sounds. "Probably squirrels," he said. But Daniel knew that wasn't true, because squirrels don't breathe like people. That night Daniel set up a small camera in his bedroom. He pointed it directly at the wall. Then he went to sleep. At 2 in the morning the sound started again. The scratching, then a slow pushing sound. The camera recorded everything. The drywall slowly bulged outward, like pressure from the inside. Something was pushing against the wall. Then a small crack appeared, just wide enough for someone to look through. And from that crack, an eye appeared, watching Daniel sleep. The footage ended there. Daniel moved out of the house the next morning. Police searched the property for 2 days. They never found anyone. No hidden rooms, no tunnels, no explanation. But neighbors later said they sometimes saw a man walking through the yard late at night. Thin, dirty clothes, watching the house, like he was waiting for Daniel to move back in. If stories about the darker side of the human mind interest you, you may want to visit a channel called the Rant, Dangerous Minds. Over there we explore the psychology of some of the most disturbing characters ever created. Men like Tyler Durden, Travis Bickle, Tony Soprano, and Michael Corleone. Sometimes the monsters in movies are easier to understand than the ones that exist in real life, because real horror doesn't always live in haunted houses. Sometimes it lives inside the walls. The next story is about something even stranger. A voice that started speaking from a basement that had been sealed for years. The voice from the basement. Not every house has a basement, but the ones that do often feel different. Basements are darker, colder, older. They hold the parts of a house that most people try not to think about. Old pipes, concrete walls, shadows that never quite go away, and sometimes, things that should have stayed sealed. This story begins with a man named Robert. Robert had recently moved into an older home just outside a small town. The house itself was beautiful, hardwood floors, tall windows, and a large backyard surrounded by trees. But the basement was strange. It wasn't the typical open basement most houses have. Instead, it was divided into several small rooms built from thick concrete. The previous owner had mentioned something odd during the sale. One of the basement rooms had been sealed shut decades ago. The doorway had been covered with wood and reinforced with concrete blocks. When Robert asked why, the owner simply shrugged. "Old houses have old problems," he said. Robert didn't think much about it. The sealed room sat in the far corner of the basement. You could still see where the doorway used to be. A rectangle of old concrete blocks filled the opening. At first it was just something curious. Then Robert started hearing noises. The first time it happened was late at night. A faint sound coming from downstairs. At first he thought it was the furnace turning on. Then he realized the furnace wasn't running. The sound was quieter than that, almost like someone speaking. Robert sat up in bed and listened carefully. The sound came again, a soft voice, too quiet to understand the words. Robert slowly walked downstairs and turned on the basement light. The noise stopped immediately. The basement was silent. Nothing moved. He checked every corner of the room. Everything looked normal. But when Robert walked past the sealed doorway, he felt something strange. The air near the wall was colder, much colder than the rest of the basement. He stood there for a moment staring at the concrete blocks. Then he went back upstairs. The next night, it happened again. Same time, just after 2 in the morning. Robert woke to the sound of whispering. This time the voice was clearer, still quiet, but definitely a voice, coming from the basement. Robert grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs. As he reached the bottom step, he heard something that made him stop. A voice, speaking clearly now. But the words were strange. The voice sounded like it was talking to someone, having a conversation. Robert slowly walked toward the sealed doorway. The whispering stopped. Complete silence. Robert stood there staring at the wall. Then he heard something else. 3 slow knocks from inside the sealed room. Robert felt his heart begin to race. There was no way someone could be inside that room. The doorway had been sealed for decades, and yet the knocking came again. 3 slow taps from the other side of the wall. Robert stepped backward and ran upstairs. The next morning he called a contractor to look at the basement. The man examined the sealed doorway carefully. The concrete blocks were old, very old. He tapped on the wall and shook his head. "No way anyone's getting through that," he said. Robert told him about the knocking. The contractor laughed. "Probably pipes in the wall," he said. But Robert knew better, because pipes don't knock back when you knock first. That night, Robert decided to test something. He went into the basement and stood in front of the sealed doorway. Then he knocked on the concrete wall 3 times. He waited. Nothing happened. Robert felt a little foolish. Maybe the contractor had been right. Maybe it really was just pipes. Robert turned to walk upstairs. Then he heard it. 3 knocks from inside the wall. Exactly the same pattern. Robert froze. He slowly turned back toward the sealed doorway. The wall was completely still, but he knew what he had heard. Something inside that room had knocked back. Robert moved out of the house 2 weeks later. He never went into the basement again. The new owners eventually renovated the house and removed the sealed doorway. When the contractors broke through the concrete blocks, they found something unusual. The room behind the wall was completely empty. No furniture, no pipes, no hidden tunnels, just a small concrete room with bare walls. But on the inside of the sealed doorway, there were scratch marks, long, deep scratch marks, and written into the concrete wall were 3 words, carved over and over again. "Let me out." If stories like this keep your mind wandering in the dark, consider subscribing for more disturbing night stories. And if you enjoy exploring the darker side of the human mind, you might also enjoy another channel called The Rant, Dangerous Minds. Over there, We explore the psychology of some of the most disturbing characters ever created. Men like Tyler Durden, Travis Bickle, Tony Soprano, and Michael Corleone. Sometimes the most frightening stories aren't about ghosts. Sometimes they're about the things people hide and the things they try to keep sealed away. Most people rarely think about their attic. It's just empty space above the ceiling, a place where old boxes sit untouched for years. But attics have one strange advantage. They can see everything happening below. This story begins with a woman named Claire. Claire lived alone in a small two-story house at the edge of town. The house was older but comfortable, the kind of place that felt warm and quiet most of the time. Above the house was a narrow attic that stretched from one end of the roof to the other. Claire had been up there only once when she first moved in. It was dusty, cramped, and full of insulation. Nothing interesting. After that, she never thought about it again. Until the noises started. The first sound came late at night. A soft creak above the ceiling in her bedroom. Claire assumed it was the house settling. Old houses always made noises, but the creaking kept happening. Sometimes it sounded like slow movement across the attic floor. Other times, it sounded like something being dragged. Claire tried to ignore it for several nights, but the sounds kept coming back. Always late at night, always above her bedroom. One evening she grabbed a flashlight and pulled down the attic ladder in the hallway. Dust fell from the ceiling as the ladder unfolded. Claire slowly climbed up. The attic was exactly how she remembered it. Dark wooden beams, thick insulation, old cardboard boxes left by the previous owners. Nothing moved. Nothing looked disturbed. Claire felt slightly embarrassed for worrying about it. She climbed back down and closed the attic door. That night the noises returned. Only this time they sounded closer, not above the hallway, directly above her bed. Claire lay there listening carefully. The sound came again, a slow step, then another, like someone walking quietly across the attic floor. Claire sat up in bed. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light shined across the ceiling. The footsteps stopped. Complete silence. Claire waited several minutes. Nothing else happened. The next morning she went back into the attic. This time she searched more carefully. Near the far end of the attic she found something strange. The insulation had been pushed aside. Underneath it was a small area of exposed wood, almost like a sleeping space. Claire stared at it for a long moment. Then she noticed something else, a small empty food wrapper, then another. Someone had been eating up there. Claire felt a cold chill move through her chest. She slowly looked around the attic. The place suddenly felt very different, like she wasn't alone. Claire climbed down immediately and called the police. Officers arrived an hour later and searched the house. They found nothing. No one in the attic. No signs of forced entry. Just the food wrappers and the small cleared space in the insulation. The officers suggested it might have been a homeless person who had gotten in somehow and left. Claire tried to accept that explanation, but that night something happened that made the situation much worse. At 2 in the morning, Claire woke up again. The attic ladder in the hallway slowly creaked open. She heard the wood unfold step by step. Claire sat frozen in her bed, listening. A soft thump sounded in the hallway. Someone had just climbed down from the attic. Claire grabbed her phone and quietly locked herself in the bedroom. She called the police again. When officers arrived minutes later, they searched the house. Once again, they found nothing. No intruder, no open windows, no signs anyone had entered or left. But when they checked the attic, they found something new. Fresh footprints in the dust, footprints leading from the sleeping area to a small vent that looked down into Claire's bedroom. Someone had been watching her from above, for weeks, maybe longer. Claire moved out the very next day. The house was sold months later to another family, and according to neighbors, the attic ladder still opened sometimes late at night, slowly, like someone climbing down.